In 1973, Congress passed a law. It said, if a president sends American troops into combat without a declaration of war, he has 60 days. 60 days to either get congressional approval or bring them home. The war in Iran started February 28th. That means the 60-day clock expires May 1st, 13 days from now, and the Senate is already voting. So here's the question. What happens when the clock runs out and the president simply doesn't care? Let's start with what the War Powers Resolution actually is. Because most people have heard the term, but have never had anyone explain it in plain English. In 1973, Congress has just watched two presidents, Johnson and Nixon, escalate the Vietnam War for years without a formal declaration of war from Congress. Tens of thousands of Americans are dead. The public is furious, and Congress finally says, enough. They passed the War Powers Resolution over Nixon's veto. He called it unconstitutional. Congress passed it anyway, and here's what it says, stripped of their legal language. 1. The president can deploy military force in an emergency without waiting for Congress if American territory, troops, or citizens are directly attacked. 2. Within 48 hours, he must notify Congress in writing about what he did and why. 3. He then has 60 days to get formal authorization from Congress, or he must withdraw. That's the law. It has been on the books for 53 years. It has applied to every president since Nixon. May 1st is day 60 of American military operations against Iran. Now, let me remind you how we got here, because the setup matters. On February 28, 2026, the president announced what he called a massive and ongoing military campaign against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure. No congressional vote, no declaration of war. The announcement came in a morning post, followed by a press conference. 8 days before that, you may remember this, the Supreme Court ruled that the president needed congressional authorization to impose tariffs. Tariffs, trade policy. The president had to go to Congress for that. But for war, for bombs, for American pilots flying combat missions over sovereign nations, that happened before breakfast on a Thursday, without a vote, the channel covered that moment and it became our most watched long form video because people felt the contradiction in their gut. Well, the contradiction just got worse. That 60-day clock, the World Powers Resolution said, it expires in 13 days. As of this morning, here's where things stand. The Senate is already voting on a resolution to invoke the War Powers Act, which would force the president to either get congressional authorization within a limited window or begin withdrawing forces. A bipartisan group of senators is backing it. That means Republicans are crossing the aisle. The White House says the vote is unconstitutional interference. The president's allies say the War Powers Resolution itself is unconstitutional. The presidents have always had the right to conduct military operations without Congress. And here's the thing, they're not entirely wrong that presidents have used that argument before. Obama did it in Libya. Clinton did it in Kosovo. Bush in both Gulf wars stretch the limits. But here's what's different this time. The Supreme Court just told this president 8 weeks ago that executive power has limits when it comes to unilateral economic decisions. So the question that nobody in Washington will ask directly is this: if the president needs Congress permission to charge you more for a refrigerator, why doesn't he need their permission to start a war? I want to go somewhere most coverage won't go. We talk about the World Powers Resolution as if it's a procedural question, a clock, a countdown, a legislative technicality. It isn't. The founders were obsessed with one specific fear: that a single person would have the power to take a nation to war. They had watched kings do it for centuries, drag entire populations into conflicts that served the royal ambition, not the people. So they split the world power deliberately. The president commands the military, but Congress, the people's representatives, declare war. They control the money. They control the authorization. This wasn't an accident. It was the design. James Madison wrote that the executive branch is the branch most prone to war. That's a quote from one of the men who wrote the Constitution. He designed the world power to sit in Congress precisely because he didn't trust presidents with it. Now, fast forward to today. The Senate is voting on whether to reassert that design, whether to tell the president the 60 days are almost up. The law applies to you. Come to us or come home. And the question every American watching this vote should be asking isn't, do you support the Iran war or oppose it? The question is, who gets to decide? Because if the answer is one person, without a vote, without a debate, without your representative raising their hand, then the system Madison built isn't just being stretched, it's being hollowed out. And once that's gone, it doesn't matter which party is in power. The weapon doesn't care who's holding it. Here's why this is not just a Washington story. When the president can take the country to war without a vote, the consequences land on specific people. Service members deployed without Congress ever saying, "We authorize this." Families who find out that their loved one is in a combat zone from a news alert, not a congressional debate. Taxpayers who will fund a war that was never debated in the open, where no one had to stand up and say their name and cast a vote. And veterans, because there is a long, painful history in this country of wars launched without declaration that later became politically inconvenient to own. When that happens, the people who fought them get abandoned because no one in Washington ever officially said yes. That's not hypothetical. That's the pattern. The world powers vote happening today isn't about being pro-war or anti-war. It's about whether the people sending others to fight have to answer to anyone. So here is where we are. 13 days until the clock expires. The law says get authorization or withdraw. The Senate is already voting. The White House is calling it unconstitutional. And the world is watching to see if the clock that Congress set 53 years ago means anything at all. I want to leave you with one thought. When the Supreme Court ruled on tariffs, the president didn't like the ruling, but the ruling stuck because the institution held. The votes happening now are a test of whether Congress can hold, not because of politics, not because of which party benefit, but because the Constitution put the world power there for a reason, and that reason was you. If you find this useful, share it with one person who doesn't usually think about these questions. That's how this channel reaches people who need it. Subscribe if you want to keep following this story, because May 1st is coming and this is far from over. And watch the previous episode on this. It's linked in the description, because everything I explained about the World Powers Resolution is now coming to a head in real time. See you next time.